Well, hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us this morning in Los Angeles. I'm Brigadier General Jason Cothern. I'm the Vice Commander here at the Space and Missile Systems Center in El Segundo, California. And I'd like to welcome you to this mission domain panel where we're going to be discussing Joint All-Domain Command and Control and the Advanced Battle Management System. I'll remind everybody that this is an interactive panel, so everyone in the audience, please feel free to send us your questions via the Q&A button on your screen. I'd like to start off by thanking General Orville Wright and the entire Air Force Association team for putting together an event like this, giving us a forum with which we can use to talk about the important issues, topics, and of the day. I'd especially like to thank our distinguished panelists that are joining us today, helping us to advance this conversation on this incredibly important topic. Let me start out by virtually introducing Mr. James Dorrell, Vice President of the Advanced Battle Management System at Lockheed Martin. Mr. Dave Johnson, Vice President of Strategy for Integrated Mission Systems Segment at L3 Harris Technologies. And Mr. Thomas J. Lennon Jr., Senior Vice President and Air Force Account Executive at Parsons Corporation. Thank you again for joining us, gentlemen. I know each of you bring an incredible breadth and depth of experience to this mission area, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Before we get started, let me kind of set the stage a bit. We face an incredibly complex and dynamic environment in every domain of operations today. Countries around the world are leveraging new technologies and tools to gain competitive advantages in pursuit of their national strategic goals. Increases in computing power, reductions in cost have enabled everything from cheap but very powerful drones to an ever-expanding number of small and microsatellites on orbit. New communications technologies like 5G offer increased data rates, while advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence provide us with incredible new tools to sort through data and to enhance our commanders and warfighters' decision-making capabilities. In the space domain, countries like Russia and China are actively developing and have demonstrated systems that threaten our assets on orbit and challenge the peaceful use of the global commons of space. Just last year, we saw Russia test its Noodle anti-satellite missile and conduct a test of a co-orbital kinetic kill vehicle. In the DoD's annual report to Congress on China, it described the PLA's pursuit of systems like lasers, jammers, and other capabilities designed to blind and deafen systems in space. In the air domain, the same report described the intensity of Chinese investment in their anti-access and aerial denial systems, as well as upgrades to aircraft like their H-6 nuclear-capable bomber, their new GX-11 electronic warfare plane. So the challenges posed by these developments require an aggressive focus on building high bandwidth secure networks that allow our joint systems to pass data between diverse mission systems and link capabilities in ways that place our adversary on the horns of a dilemma by increasing our resilience and interconnectedness. So we must broaden our apertures and consider how to build a truly linked system of systems across services and domains while keeping closely linked with our partners in industry, both those specifically involved in the national security arena and those in the commercial world who are continuing to create new foundational technologies. So gentlemen, before we get into the Q&A, I'd like to ask each of you to share some opening thoughts with us. And I'd like to start out with you, Mr. Dorrell. James, could you start us off?
Thanks, Jason, and thanks to AFA for sponsoring this panel and my other panel members. I think this is a very emerging, critical mission area that we really need to be talking quite a bit. But let me share a few opening thoughts. Number one, Lockheed Martin is very proud to have a robust advanced battle management system portfolio, one that spans all of our U.S. services and their respective domains. And across that portfolio, we have been focused on delivering connected, open, and affordable capabilities. The primary way that we have been doing that is in partnership with our customers, executing a series of incremental demonstrations and tabletop exercises almost over the last 2 decades. Some people say that we were in the ABMS area, JADO area before it was cool, but I know many of our industry partners were too, but we've been working on this for quite a while, and we've made significant progress. For example, in partnership recently with the Air Force during our Gateway 1 ABMS demo, we successfully showed that to be able to demonstrate a multi-level secure comms gateway, enabling data to be exchanged between the F-35 and F-22. Additionally, we've demonstrated recently the integration between a U-2, an F-35, and a multi-domain ground station. And in that demo, we proved the ability to be able to leverage the F-35 sensor data for missile defense and significantly reduce the data to decision timeline. We've also been investing in some foundational technologies such as artificial intelligence, open architectures using government standards, cloud computing, and machine learning, with each of these demonstrating in flight or followed up with demonstrations in flight. We're also developing ways to bring data fusion and information sharing to the tactical edge, and doing that in a way that has minimal impact on our legacy weapon systems. Our approach really avoids having a major weapon system modification to avoid cost and drive up affordability. So just to kind of summarize, Lockheed has been in the JADO and ABMS area and demonstrating capabilities for several years. Our strategy is pretty clear, and that is to invest in those foundational technologies like open system architecture and multi-level security and cloud computing, then execute a relevant demonstration, and then have a leave behind capability where our COCOMs and our operational customers can continue to experiment with that capability. So with that, I'll wrap up and thank again the AFA for this opportunity and pass it over to one of my colleagues.
All right, Mr. Dave Johnson, if you don't mind giving us your opening remarks. Thank you.
Right, yeah, thanks, General Cothern. I appreciate you hosting this panel, something I enjoyed when I was in uniform, and thanks to the Air Forces Association for holding this conference. For me, a retired Navy flag, participating in an Air Force symposium is a sign of today's joint approach, where it takes the best effort from all the services and industry to provide warfighters what they need, when they need it, to meet the adversaries head on. Before coming to L3 Harris to work for Sean Stackley, I was his principal military deputy when he was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, ASN RDA. After serving as RDA for 9 years, Sean left during the administration change, and I remained PMD to Hondo Gertz, who brought his Special Operations Command thinking on innovation and speed, two critical aspects for developing JADC2. Now, RDA is responsible for Navy and Marine Corps acquisition and R&D, about $60 to $70 billion per year. For me, having designed and built submarines for 33 years, coming to RDA, that was a change. I was now working on acquiring platforms such as aircraft carriers and joint strike fighters, and acquiring systems like cooperative engagement capability and Aegis baseline upgrades, and also closely working with the program executive officers who developed these warfare systems on our Navy and Marine Corps platforms. And it gave me a good foundation for this additional role I have at L3 Harris as our enterprise lead for ABMS and the related JADC2 efforts. Now, L3 Harris, it's a great company to work for, and we are in the systems business. We're not wed to any one platform. We provide high impact, high TRL technologies with true enterprise-wide multi-domain solutions that enable joint all-domain command and control, done with agility and speed. We've been working closely with all three, now 4 services and the classified customers on ABMS, Project Overmatch, and Project Convergence, and providing what industry I think can uniquely provide, which is a perspective across these service efforts, since we touch each of the services, and building out this true joint capability. Now, we're coming at ABMS from an architecture that is platform agnostic, capability flexibly deployed to any ABMS compliant open system or cloud node, data centric, meaning freedom of data movement and optimized discovery across the enterprise, leveraging our Air Force program of record for network centric collaborative targeting, NCCT, and software defined with virtualized infrastructure and capabilities flexibly deployed, managed, and controlled anywhere in the enterprise. Now we're using the same approach for the NATO alliance future surveillance and control work in Europe. There is substantial commonality. L3Harris, along with both small and commercial businesses, is working on all aspects of ABMS, including digital engineering and data standards, being actively involved with open standards bodies like OMS, UCI, and OCS. We're designing multifunction processors, multifunction apertures, and the open software that links them, leveraging our digital engineering expertise. Sensing and sensor integration. From undersea to deep space, we provide a wide range of ISR capabilities supporting the warfighter. Our most visible capability being our long-standing work with Rivet Joint, arguably the world's premier airborne ISR platform, and our data fusion and distribution expertise with NCCT. Interesting enough, we have deployed in Poland today a scaled ISR capability in a pod on an MQ-9, getting at distributed sensing and the architecture needed to rapidly deliver this capability on an unmanned platform. And I just received this morning an update on the successful use of this capability in ABMS on Ramp 4. And then there was secure processing, providing certified communications security products and systems for strategic and tactical applications for many years on numerous platforms. And finally, communications, our work with protected waveforms, senior leader comms, multi-level security, and Air Force, Army, and Navy networks in building JADC2 capability. Now, the most critical aspect of ABMS, secure, resilient, and assured comms, is where much of our current work in ABMS lies. And as a former Navy acquirer, I'm looking forward to increased acquisition discipline with better clarity on ABMS's direction and an acquisition strategy, along with improved industry interaction via the upcoming RCO-led Industry Day. I consider these positive vectors. It is an exciting time to be in this business, and we at L3Harris look forward to the work ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. Now I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Jay Lennon. Over to you, sir.
Cothern, thank you for the time today. Thank you to AFA for putting on the virtual event. Very critical for our Air Force to continue to have these discussions between the services, both Space Force and Air Force, as well as industry, and have open, transparent conversations. And to the airmen and guardians who are taking your time out today to listen to a bunch of old guys talk, really appreciate it. And hopefully we can leave at least a couple nuggets of know-how with you or thoughts to provoke your future growth in the JADC2 domain. And so part of that, I'm going to take a slight tact to where we were previously. And I'm going to start off with a conversation about a word. And so we talk about architectures, we talk about systems of systems, we talk about the enemy, blue and red, but I would go back to a single word, which is behavior, right? And so how are we going to adjust behaviors? And so all of us have scar tissues that make us view the world in a certain way, and particularly in JADC2. So I'll use my own personal experience and vignette to set this up, but let's keep the word behavior in the kind of forefront as we go through it. So I grew up initially as an aviator in the Air Force and Navy, flying fighters and bombers. So, 20 something years ago, my brain became hardwired in a multi-environment, multi-mission capability. Now, today, all our airmen and guardians are already there. The PME that they have, the technology that they grow up with, they're already hardwired to look across environments and domains and find solutions. For me, the factor that really came to cause me to sit back and really think about JADC2 was a little over a decade ago. I was running the NATO targeting cell in Afghanistan. And when we were there, we were tasked to go after high value targets, often in a time sensitive manner. And what would end up happening is I worked for an Army ground commander, an Army 2-star, and an Army 4-star. They would see where these targets were. They would assess that we need to go after and execute a mission against a particular target. Oftentimes, we required air support, i.e. the weapons, the kinetic effects would be coming off of an aircraft belonging to the United States Air Force. So what would occur was, even though the 2- and 4-star Army generals would say, let's go hit it, it would have to go back to the CAOC for Air Force approval because the weapon was coming off an Air Force system. Now, that we can talk about policy, we can talk about roles and responsibility, but for me, as I unpacked it over the years, it comes down to trust. And it's not trust of the general officers on the Army or Air Force side, it's trust of the data, right? And so if we had an ability that the data is shared across all players with views, with the same view of how the data is being used, collected, and ensuring that there's provenance of the data, now there's a level of trust and we can change the behavior for how we execute joint operations. The Air Force and the Space Force and with Overmatch as well as Project Convergence with the Army, we're all going that direction. You heard from James and Dave, industry has caught on to this behavior. They're like, yes, this is where we need to go. But we need to make sure that we're all going, and we used to say in the F-16 community, same way, same day, right? We need to make sure that we're having open conversations with industry, with academia, with commercial outside of DoD, and with the services, that we all have the same mindset and vision of where we should be going. So we go back to the data, right? Again, we're creating a data fabric. We're talking through that. We're talking about digital engineering. We're talking about data standards. All those things are critical to getting us on the same sheet of music. At Parsons, we are a large company, not as large as Lockheed Martin or L3, and our organization is split up into critical infrastructure as well as high-end technical support to the government, right? And not just DoD, but to Homeland Security, to state, to all the different agencies within the interagency. But what that allows us to do is take a slightly different tact. And as we develop and mature our capabilities on the data side, we look at things like smart cities. We're one of the leading companies on smart cities in the world. And so we use those educational points as we move forward and transition it into the government space and vice versa, right? And so, on the government side, it's all about collaboration with data. How do we ensure that collection, transfer, analysis, creation into operational intelligence, and then distribution is all secure? And both James and Dave hit on that, right? So when we go national tactical means, so when we bring things down from the space domain, we put it on a link and we send it out as targeting information. How are we sure it's not corrupted somewhere, right? At Parsons, we have a program called National Tactical Data Manager. It's going to be, or it is a program of record with the Navy. We have started to see that and truly realize how we need to deal with that data. We've been doing open architecture data assessment and distribution for over 5 years in open architectures and with containerization and using Kubernetes and everything else that now is the standard. We've been doing that, as have my industry partners. And so again, industry is much further along, I think, sometimes than we're giving credit for. A lot of times we want to jump to commercial. There are, and we will talk through it, I'm sure, later in this conversation, there are some inherent differences between I need to deliver a package for Amazon and I need to put a warhead on a forehead, right? There's some requirements that exist there that don't exist in the commercial. And we really need to be smart about how we talk through that and how we address that as we go forward. Back to behavior. Ultimately, with that data source and the ability to spread the right data across the joint domains, we can now better influence the red forces, right? And really what we want is we want to jump back into a level of deterrence theory. We want to do whatever it takes in order to stop the next level. On the board yesterday, they talked about, on one of the boards, they talked about wargaming and how during one of our most recent war games, we actually had the red team say, well, we're not going to attack you because of the force presence that you've created. Well, part of that is really the ability to run in the JADC2 command and control joint all domain and ensure that we're bringing the right asset to bear, right? We want to be in the news and in the information warfare first. We don't want to go to cyber war. We definitely don't want to go to war in space. We would prefer to stay away from kinetics. And at the very highest end, we're where the admiral came from, the nuclear world, right? We want to do whatever is left of nuclear to keep us away from there. And when we start talking about our near peer or peers as we move forward, that's really the threat that we have to start reassessing, right? That is back on the table. And oftentimes their red lines may be different than our red lines. And again, we need to understand that. And this will lead us into discussions that I'm sure we'll have on the rest of the panel about artificial intelligence, machine learning, extended automation. So when I go back and I ask, the airmen and guardians to look at it, when you think about what should we be doing next with our architectures on the blue side, or what influences should we be presenting on the red side, it really needs to come back to behavior. We're trying to change a behavior that typically is pretty well founded, right? And so, have we gotten to the point where we're going to launch a Tomahawk based on information provided from a 5th gen aircraft, which ultimately was relayed from somebody sitting on the ground? Are we comfortable with that? The answer is we do it in war games, we do it in practice. Are we ready to do it in reality? So I'll turn it back to our questions. I'm sure we're going to hit on a lot of the points, but thank you for the time, and let's press.
Absolutely. So thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate all those opening comments. I took a ton of notes here. So one thing that I heard all three of you mention was data standards. And so, or standards, open architecture standards, but certainly data standards. So Jay, I'm going to ask you this question that kind of brings it all together in a certain aspect from our adversaries, so to speak. Over the last decade, we've seen a strong push by China for companies like Huawei to set technology standards for things like 5G and artificial intelligence. Given the importance of advanced technology to JADC2 vision, how are you approaching the issue of new standards for commercial technologies?
Hey, sir, thanks for that softball. I really appreciate it. So, in 5G, there are already standards that are being set up internationally. So Japan, even China, the US, we are part of the 5G consortium that's setting up standards. That's great. We can set international standards for what 5G is, how it should operate, how it should be used in the future. The end result is, though, it doesn't keep somebody like Huawei to going off on their own and creating one-offs that influence the 5G environment. One of the groups that I work with is NDIA. They have a 5G spectrum management team going on right now. I'm part of that. And we've really started to dig into how does commercial 5G potentially influence or impact government/DoD 5G, right? I mean, that's a very small band. It's a very valuable band that we're all going to have to work in. And so how is that deconfliction going to happen? A lot of that, sir, is going to come back to you and your team, obviously. And we need to look at being a very strong voice in these standards consortiums that are out setting the standards for 5G. Additionally, same thing with AI. Within DoD, we've set the ethics or an ethics for AI use. That's great. But, when we look at a civilian standard set that comes to us and kind of goes to one of the points I mentioned earlier, we probably need to put, and I hate bureaucracy, but we probably need to put a DoD level above that to go, okay, back to my phrase, warheads on foreheads, if that's what we're doing, do the commercial standards really meet the mark? Or do we need something more robust that helps us ensure that we are towing the right line as we go forward? When we were talking about Huawei setting their own standards for 5G, you can think back, it wasn't long ago that Microsoft did the same thing with things, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. They kind of set the standards for what those were. It's all worked out for us. But ultimately, when you start getting 5G and it has critical commercial and military impacts, do we want to allow that to happen with a single one-off company? And that does drive us into another discussion area, which is our manufacturing and supply chain security. And so, again, when we start looking at 5G and even specifically AI, those pieces and parts that are coming in to help us execute those mission sets, I'll call AI and 5G a mission set, are we sure that third and fourth level suppliers are not influenced by nefarious suppliers somewhere else down the chain at the 5th and 6th level? Again, there are standards for supply chain. Parsons runs those with every single piece of kit that we get from another provider. We go through those standards, we bring licenses on, we hold those tight, and we review them on a monthly status check to make sure the license is still good. Oftentimes these licenses are attached to a third-party provider, so we have to look at that. So all these things kind of come together, and I'm sure the OEMs have this in spades, because again, they are depending on third and fourth order suppliers, that becomes a critical supply chain node or risk that they have to deal with on a regular basis. So I'll turn it over to my panel mates and let them go.
All right, let me remind everybody out there in the audience, if you do have questions, feel free to tap the Q&A button at the top of your screen and type those questions in. We do have one question, and it relates to some of the discussion we talked about with data and trust and security. I think everybody mentioned something about security in your opening remarks. So Dave, in both the commercial and military worlds, network security and secure comms are both vital elements how we do business every day, but they're also prime targets for our adversaries and malicious actors. So how is L3Harris Technologies approaching communication security, and what can we learn from that in this JADC2 ABMS construct?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Communication security, it's a foundational aspect of JADC2. If the force can't communicate securely and reliably, then the premise of a network-enabled decision-making system is flawed. Any successful approach must include security designed in from the start, needs to be developed by an experienced team and compliant with communication standards. Now, L3Harris's approach is based on over 60 years of providing NSA-certified communication security products and systems for strategic and tactical applications, including voice, circuit switched and broadband data, and terrestrial radio and satellite links. Security is a critical attribute of any communication system. It must be designed in, as I said, and it has to be in throughout the architecture. It can't be added in after the fact with a device or an application. Our approach includes evaluating supply chain, root of trust, authentication, accreditation, certification, and anti-tamper. And then to ensure that the systems remain jam resistant and have low probability of being intercepted and detected, we provide data encryption for communications, security, ComSec, confidentiality, and support transmission security or TransSec services. Critically, we also help key management systems to create key management systems to support the secure distribution of cryptographic keys to fielded systems. And finally, L3Harris is a foundational contributor to government communication security standards like HAPI, High Assurance Internet Protocol Encryption, and SCIP, the Secure Communications Interoperability Protocol. And also to new waveform developments like the protected tactical waveform, and we continue to contribute to industry working groups like SOSA to make sure that security is adequately addressed. So, much in line with what Jay was saying, is this is foundational stuff if you're going to succeed at developing a network capability across the force. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Continuing that thread of security, let me ask James this question. Hey, in a JADC2 construct, there's going to be numerous assets across multiple domains, collecting data, operating at different classification levels. How should we be approaching the challenge of multi-level security?
Thanks, Jason. Multi-level security is, to me, one of those foundational technologies that we must have as we go forward and try to tackle JADC2 and ABMS. In fact, just the short list of foundational technologies, if you were to ask me, is edge processing, the resilient comms that we've talked about today, the management of that data, and then that multi-layer security really lays over on top of that. But I think Jay said it earlier, how do you trust the data that's coming in, right? And whether it's the collection of the data, the fusing of the data, the dissemination, multi-layer security, multi-level security is going to be critically important. And I think we also mentioned it earlier on this panel, our national technical meetings are collecting at one security level. Our fighters are at a different SAP level. Our bombers might be at a different SAP level. So, the good news here is that in the series of demonstrations that we've done recently over the last several years, Lockheed Martin's actually demonstrated the ability to pass that data. And the demonstration just recently where a U-2 act as that gateway, and the F-35 and the F-22 SAP data was brought into the U-2 and then downgraded through an MLS and then distributed in the network at a secret level of security. And so we have demonstrated it in small.
James, I want to make sure, I don't know if you can hear me, but I've lost your audio. So I'm not sure if that's a system-wide thing. Is everybody else able to hear James?
I'm back up. Sorry. I may have can you hear me now?
Yes, got you now.
It's really good.
Let me just wrap in this line of questioning and just say open systems and secure systems are inherently in conflict with each other. And we have to work with the government and industry standards and our industry investments to make sure that we have that multi-level security at every step of the way.
Thanks, James. Appreciate that. So near and dear to my heart is the acquisition world, so what I've heard from several of you is changing behavior, right? But also innovation and speed, but working this across multiple domains, multiple services, multiple industry partners. How do we maintain innovation and speed and changing the behavior in the acquisition and procurement world? What do we need to do better on the government side to help this partnership, but keep the speed of innovation where we need it to be? And I'll open that up to all three, whoever would like to respond to that, or if all of you would.
I'd like to start, if I could. Having been in your shoes, I know that I undervalued the communication with industry and how much industry really does need to understand what the customer wants. And I think if you want us now industry to innovate and invest in our own R&D, what we need are clearer sight lines to what matters the most to you. We see some things out in industry that the customer may not see, and technology trends and things that might be brought to bear, or like I noted in my answer, maybe from another service that you could apply into your instant problem. However, I think the things that help us go faster on industry and be more innovative is a better understanding of kind of what you want, not telling us how to do it, but what you want, and working interactively with you. My Navy hat, when we designed and put out requirements for the new frigate, we did it interactively with industry, and we were trying to bridge the gap between the art of the possible and then what the customer needed to be competitive in the fight. So I would just emphasize clarity in what you need, and also some prioritization of what you want us to work on first. That would also help us do a better job and bring better value to you. Over.
So I'll jump in here. So a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity at one of our other AFAs to sit in a small group where Will Roper was talking. And one of the things Dr. Roper brought up was that in theory, he wants to minimize the sustainment, especially when we start talking about software capabilities that the OEMs or the larger industry brings, right? And so that is a great concept. And with continuous delivery capabilities, that is something that we can definitely do on a regular basis. And it limits the sustainment requirement that is levied against the Air Force or the service, so Space Force or Air Force. The problem is when we start getting into software factories where they're being an integrator, as well as a developer, as well as a sustainer, we start to get meshed in what you want industry to bring and what the government's going to do, right? And I'm not saying it's wrong or good, that the creation of Kessel Run and what they're doing and what they brought to the table as far as how we should do business, great. Platform One is knocking it out of the park. What a great concept. And Nick Shalon has really created a tool for the services and DoD as a whole to really go to that next level. So I'm not naysaying any of it, but to Dave's point, which is, if you want us to innovate and bring solutions, we can do that. If you want us to sit people in a government facility and develop the solutions you asked for, it's much more difficult for us to then bring the new innovative solutions, because we're supplying them to you, and the airmen and guardians are creating that. Right? And so we're at a little bit of a I won't call it a disconnect, but a crossroads. And we need to make a decision as services of which direction we're going. Do you want innovative capability delivered by industry? We're happy to do that. And we have the technologies and the smart people to go out and give you those technologies if you tell us, as Dave said, what the requirement is in a transparent fashion. If the answer is no, we are going to develop it in the government domain, and we want you to sit next to us and help us develop it, we can do that too. And I'm not saying that's not innovative, but it will probably get you a different tool set than if you just send industry off on their own. So food for thought.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with my colleagues more. I'll just add one final thought, and that is we need a common standard to work to be able to do that innovation. I know the RCO has a long history of being able to develop common standards, and hopefully going forward, that's one of the things that they're going to continue and leverage the work that's been done to date. But we have to have clear, guidance and clear acquisition strategy in order for the industry to know exactly what's expected of us.
Appreciate all that input. That's great. And I think that, directing the stand-up of the PEO for this and the DAF RCO, I think will help in that as well. In trying to, as I think Dave Johnson said, acquisition discipline, but still getting us down the path quickly. So appreciate all that feedback. Taking a little different turn here. Question we have is, what's the future of legacy data links like Link 16 and ABMS? So Mr. Dorrell, I don't know, that might be a good question for you. What do you think, not just maybe Link 16, but other legacy data links? Where do we see those in the future of ABMS?
I think we have to continue to be able to leverage the work that's been done in the past by Link 16 and TTNT and all these other data links. And I think the ABMS network and the ABMS infrastructure as it's developed has to be able to accommodate that, but do it at an affordable cost too. We cannot make ABMS be this huge bill that each of the PEOs has to pay. And that's where a common set of standards comes in. But we cannot throw out the legacy data links that are on many of our legacy platforms. They have to be able to play going forward. Over.
Thanks, James. I appreciate that. I think we may have touched on this question a little bit, but it has a slightly different take on it. So let me ask this one, and this is open to all three of you gentlemen. The question is, you've all mentioned the need for further collaboration between the DoD and industry. There's a perceived capability gap between the DoD and industry. The question is that gap real? And if so, how do we move forward to close this gap and accelerate the modernization of the Department of Defense?
I'll start. That's an interesting question. I'm not sure what the capability, it's an interesting thought, a capability gap between what industry can do and government can do. I think actually that there really is no capability gap. The gap is essentially, as James and Jay have said, is understanding and being able to work collaboratively with you. And even in competitive environments, this can be done. This is why you want skilled acquirers in the business, and you want folks who are innovators injecting their ideas and be able to move fast in developing these technologies. So I don't think it's a question of they're not as capable as us or they don't move as fast as us. I think that's the wrong dialogue. I think the right dialogue is that we need to bring the best of both, because guess what? The industry is not sitting there in the airplane or on the submarine or on the ship or in the missile cell like the uniform folks are, understanding what the real problem is. So we need to better understand what you need and we need to help you by applying the talents that we can bring. Over.
Yeah, Dave, thank you for that. And that's an interesting point. And maybe I'll shift to Jay on this question. We talked about behavior, but Dave, you mentioned talent, right? So building out the JADC2 vision is going to require workforce skilled at technologies like artificial intelligence, data scientists, advanced telecommunication protocols. So Jay, from your perspective, do you feel like there's a sufficient talent pool out there to hire to build these new integrated systems and help us with these new groundbreaking technologies?
I definitely think there is. For us, all of us, a good portion of our workforce comes from legacy uniform wearers, right? And so there's a deep-seated patriotic desire to come back into industry because you do still feel like you're giving back, right? And a lot of times you'll talk to people and they're like, yeah, whatever, you're in industry. But the reason we're all here and not off doing something else is we do feel like we're giving something back either through the tools that we're doing or the conversations we're having, that we're furthering our national security. And you're going to have a level of people that have never been in uniform, but they feel a draw towards the national security realm, and they want to serve, and they see working with Department of Defense industry partners as doing that. And so to that point, I think we do have the talent. The flip side of that is our pay bands are not what commercial industry can offer, right? We lose engineers on a regular basis to places like Google, Amazon. I mean, one of our best engineers walked out the door a couple months ago for a whole, almost double the pay we could pay him to go work at Amazon, right? And I know these two gentlemen, their industries and are definitely, or their companies are definitely experiencing the same thing. So there is a bit of a push-pull of how we are kind of captured in the far dynamics versus what commercial industry with independent investors can pay out, right? And that's one of those again, that takes us to that next level of, all right, are we going to go to a commercial industry and say, you give us the kit, even though you're not beholden to the FAR criteria that the rest of us are? And again, that's probably a bigger conversation than this panel, but that's something we need to continue to think about as we grow and talk about acquisition requirements, as we think about how we're going to do that within DoD.
If I could just add a thought on to build onto what Jay said, I absolutely agree that a large part of our workforce can come out of the retired military, but we're trying to recruit younger and younger engineers too. And I'll just tell you our own experience in Lockheed. If we can connect those less experienced engineers to the mission, like Jay was talking about, and that greater good of giving back, we stand a much better chance of retaining them. If they're only interested in chasing a higher salary, it is very, very hard to compete with them. Over.
Yeah, James, you're exactly right. I think, as Jay said, we can bring the mission, and that is compelling to folks. It's funny, we were in L3 Harris, we were talking about this issue of AI and the talent to be applied to, and where's the pool. And I actually phoned a friend on this one, my HR VP peer, Ann Humphreys, and she, if you just do something like look at Indeed, enterprise applications for AI have grown 270% in the last 4 years. And so it just outweighs the supply for roles like machine learning, robotics engineer, computer vision engineer, and data scientists. Universities are piling in, as Jim says, we need people coming out of universities that are proficient in this. And, they're adding a curriculum to accommodate this. But, we're competing with Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, Google across our enterprise. And so it's a real problem. We want to get people who are skilled with some practice at mid-level, but you also want to ingest in the folks at the bottom. It is a real issue that it's a real competition. Over.
Thanks, gentlemen. Appreciate that. Great perspectives. I think I'm going to point this next question to James. So how are multinational partners in coalition operations being considered or incorporated in the JADC2 architecture or in JADC2 data standards development? How do we digitally interlink this multinational force?
So it's a great question, and it was recently identified by General Horigian in USAFE, and that he has to have, he has so many allied partners operating right next to him, many of them F-35s, but many other assets across the domains. And I know it's a keen focus for Lockheed Martin too, but we are following the government's lead here. That's not something that we can do or any of the industry partners can do on their own. We have to work closely with our PEOs and our government customers, but we can certainly propose what sets of data that we industry believe need to.
James, we lost your audio again.
I keep losing you guys. Are you back again?
Yep, we got you back.
This laptop is ticking me off here. But I will just say that we must find a way, working with our government partners, to share that data, but we have to follow our government leads. And for a lot of our close allies, that's going to be all the data I believe that we have. But we have to follow the government's lead, and Lockheed, and I think the rest of industry, is leaning forward to define what those solutions are.
Thanks, James. Appreciate that.
And,
we do have
and sir, if you won't mind if I jump in here real quick. So
absolutely.
You know, so we were just recently over at IDEX, and I'm sure L3 and Lockheed Martin were there as well, right? We got a lot of interest. And again, we are a software company predominantly in the DoD kind of area, space, sensors and software. And so our C2 Core, which is a product line that does strategy through assessment capability for the air, space, and it's on the ISA platform for the space one, and cyber, it's in the 616, is gaining a lot of interest out in the greater world ecosystem for command and control of air assets. The more that we hit them on the unclassified side with how we do business, the tools that we're using, the more that we can populate those, that then takes us one level up, right? And it gets us to the 30-yard line. We then can start having that data sharing discussion. And as James knows, Lockheed Martin, with their 2 5th-gen fighters, has some amazing expertise in this area, right? And we can do that with any software. And so as we move forward, we have the capability now to start putting widgets in that allow us to share what we want and not share, but we have to start by proliferating the platforms that we use and then figuring out how we're going to share the data afterwards.
Great input, Jay. I think you actually answered a follow-up question we got that was, is there a risk of outpacing our NATO allies in JADC2 capability within the JADC2, creating challenges and working with them in the future operations? And I think to your point, if we don't get after that now through the widgets, through the multi-level security, through the policy discussions that we'll have to have, there is that risk, but I think it's surmountable. Dave, I saw you come off mute. Did you have anything to add?
Well, just when I made my opening remarks, I talked about the NATO alliance, future surveillance and control. That is very parallel to the ABMS and the JADC2 work. So I think it's imperative. Again, this is something that industry can do, is applying solutions over there in Europe and the solutions that we're doing in the US. It goes both ways, but we have the same program manager working both efforts, so that we try to commonize the which you end up with over there is an offering in Europe, but the same thing, it interoperates and can even be interchangeable with what's happening here in the US. But you got to have the policies and the parts that, Jay talked about and James over.
And as David brought up, as Dave said, that there's the standards, right? So as we start to become more, another piece of scar tissue behavior, right? Jitters. All the old guys on the phone remember jitters, right? This is the way we're going to do it. There is no go unless you do the protocols and standards with jitters, and that just didn't work, right? So part of it is both industry saying we're on board with UCI, OMS, OCS, but then also having the government come forward and go, we are using OCI, we're using OMS, we're using OCS. We're not using all three and pick the one you like. And this becomes a little bit less of a contentious discussion, as we talk about, and all three of us have said it, the open architecture standards, the microservices. It gives us much more leeway to be able to work in the areas we need to and still be collaborative and be able to integrate for synergies.
Thanks, Jay. I think we're getting maybe our last question in here. Are there cultural challenges that you've encountered working with the DoD with the mindset shift to ABMS and JADC2? Maybe this is kind of the behavior question or the behavior point.
It is. So, I guess this isn't a problem. It's just, it is what it is, right? And for industry, does ABMS, and James kind of alluded to it a little bit, but does ABMS overmatch convergence, pick your service and your focus area? Do you want TRL 789? Do you want TRL 345? Do you want both? And a lot of times, at least small conversations we've had with ABMS, the people that were selected to be kind of the category leads were previously program managers for another tool set, right? So what does any human do? You bring that comfortable tool set with you and say, okay, this is the first thing we're testing. Great. I don't deny that's the way we should have done it because it's available. But we need to make sure that we don't run too far down the line that we're bypassing other competing or capable systems that can then be brought in, and you go, hey, I loved widget X, but widget Z does it better, and I'm gonna pull it out, I'm gonna put it in, and this goes, we're circular now back to the acquisition discussion of how do we do that rapidly to ensure we have the best of class.
I think Jay, he makes an excellent point, because I think part of industry's frustration is we couldn't get in there and have that discussion about it's not this Navy technology you might be more familiar with, but let's just fairly compete another way to come at the problem. And so we get in the end the best thing. I do see this. I'm a bit of a pragmatist, as you have to essentially take what you got, because that's what you're going to bring to the fight. That's what people are trained on. That's what the air platforms and the systems are sustained on. But essentially, how do you transition from those towards the capability that you're building out? So you talk to a Northcom or a Paycom, they're worried about how they're going to fight tonight, and what can you bring me to help my job now? How do we deal with the multitude of data that they're besieged with? You connect all these platforms, a lot of data. So how am I going to deal with that? Just again, understanding their problem, but building a pragmatic path to go from, hey, we'll make your 5th and 4th gen fighters talk. Maybe we'll make a tanker better and then bring its capability, or we'll maybe break a rivet joint, but basically try to build out so that the warfighter can be brought along with systems they're familiar with, and then bring in parallel path these new capabilities that maybe are, as Jay said, it's actually a better technology and a better way to solve the problem. It just takes this very good dialogue with the customer in an open environment, so industry truly can compete, fairly level playing field. We in the end we want the best thing that gets into warfighter hands. Over.
Thank you very much. Well, I want to thank all of you for this outstanding discussion. I think it's been great to talk about behavior, trust, and how do we trust the data? How do we get that multi-level security and an open systems architecture in a way that we can trust that data and we can make those decisions and trust that we are putting the right warhead on the right forehead. What I'd like to do is allow each gentleman to just have a minute or so of closing comments, parting shots, as we're quickly running out of time here. Let me go first to James.
Well, thanks again, Jason and Jay and Dave for this panel. I'll just conclude by saying, I think there is a path that we can start fielding ABMS sooner than some of us may think. And I think that's incrementally with small capability releases and coming straight from maybe demonstrations later this year in Northern Edge 21. And I'll go back to one other point that our panel made, and we all look forward, I think, to getting a clear acquisition strategy and clear guidance from the customer and partnering with them to make that work. Thanks again.
Thank you, James. All right, Dave, over to you.
Hey, thanks to AFA and to you, General, for hosting this panel. It's a very timely topic. You know, we at L3 Harris, we're very excited to be contributing. I think we have a good record of success at delivering some leading edge capability and also providing some good thought leadership and partnering with the customer. And I can say as a former Navy flag, I'm encouraged by the Air Force's leadership and focus on solving this tough problem and working collaboratively with industry. It will take the collective best efforts of industry, academia, and the services to get ahead of our adversaries. But it is truly a great time to be in this business, and thanks. Over.
Thank you very much. And Jay, final words?
Sir, thank you. And thank you to David, James. Good conversation today. The only thing I'll throw out is, again, another thought piece or another thought comment, which is we can't forget the nuclear triad. We can't forget what the deterrence that comes out of that is. And we need to really be cognizant of how that flows into that larger space and JADC2 discussion. We've kind of kept them separate up to this point to a certain level, but we really need to include it in our discussions. And so thank you very much. We look forward to continuing to work with the Air Force and the Space Force, and Parsons again continues to build product. A lot of people on the line may not have heard of Parsons or probably Googling it, going, what is Parsons? But if I went down the list of the products that would provide the warfighter, they'd be like, oh, I know what that is. So just like Lockheed Martin and L3 Harris, we're here to support the warfighters, and we look forward to moving forward with you.
Well, thanks again, all of you. Appreciate your leadership in this realm. Appreciate your partnership. As I think every one of you has said, it's going to take all of us in the uniform, in the industry, in academia, putting our best efforts and our best thoughts forward. I think this was a great discussion today, brought up a lot of great points. I took a bunch of notes. So if you saw me looking down, it was me writing furiously to make sure I'm capturing what we owe industry from a government perspective in this partnership. So appreciate that, appreciate the transparency and the candor. I will just say also thank you to the audience for the questions that came forward today. Thank you again to the Air Force Association for this forum and allowing us to talk about these very important issues and think about the ways ahead. I will say, just as a reminder, this is the second of 3 panels during AFA Symposium this week on JADC2 and ABMS. Tomorrow, my boss, Lieutenant General J.T. Thompson, the Space and Missile Systems Center Commander, is going to be moderating the 3rd and final panel on this. So I encourage you to listen into him. Go back and listen into the panel that Preston Dunlap moderated, I believe yesterday, so you can get the breadth of all the phenomenal industry leaders out there and the discussions that we're having and the problems that we have in front of us to solve. So again, thank you very much, and Semper Supra.